Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want to change your mind, that's fine.
Good evening. Welcome everyone to the Planning and Development Committee of June 17th. All members of committee are here except Councillor Dillon and I think that's it. Oh, and Councillor Willens. Members of committee, there are changes to the agenda since its publication. I'll hand it over to our city clerk to walk us through the changes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, members of committee, members of staff, and the public here in the audience. On the screen are the proposed changes to this evening's meeting. Item 4.3, which is a statutory public notice item, an application to amend the zoning bylaw to permit high-density mixed-use development at 253 Queen Street East. There is a delegation requested from Sylvia Roberts. That is a statutory public notice item, so anybody who is in attendance tonight is welcome to come forward at the time of consideration of that item. Item 7.4 is a report from planning staff regarding the City of Brampton initiated student housing policy review and upcoming rental protection policy review. There is a delegation request on that item from Sylvia Roberts that will be identified as delegation 5.1 on tonight's agenda. As well, in addition, in regard to item 4.1 on tonight's agenda, a statutory public notice item regarding city-initiated draft official plan amendment measuring the sustainability of new development. If a staff presentation is requested, Michael Hoy will be the city staff person presenting tonight at the statutory public meeting. And finally, listed on the agenda for distribution prior to the meeting and in your packages on your desks, members of committee, are the minutes, item 8.1 from the Brampton Heritage Board, its meeting of May 28th. And those are the changes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, City Clerk. I have Councillor Fortini.
Thank you, through the chair. Just wanted to add a couple of items, 3 items to the agenda. One is on the driveway widening. The other one would be on for number 5 Hazel Glen Court over a shed. And the other one would be 2700 2760 North Park Drive at Plaza. And also like to remove 8.1, just put in consent.
Excuse me, Councillor Fortini. Can you clarify? So the first item of business you had suggested is?
For driveway, a discussion on
driveway opening, so that's 9.1?
The second one would be over a shed for the committee adjustment for 5 Hazel Glen Court.
It's a what, sir?
Hazel Glen.
Okay, Hazel Glen
Court, number 5. And the other one's on a plaza in North Park. It's 2700 2760 North Park Drive. And remove 8.1, put in consent.
Also move, you would like to move minutes of Brampton Heritage Board into consent?
Yep. No sense.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to add a discussion item on Palladium at Steeles and Kennedy, and it's a discussion regarding their wall mural and potential changes to it.
Okay, so that'd be item 9.4, 9.3.
9.3.
Okay, as I see there's no further changes. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting? Moved by Councillor Williams. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Do any members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Note. The clerk will also note for meeting minutes. We have the consent agenda. And we go on to now statutory public meeting reports. Are there any members here in the audience who would like to hear item 4.1 on city initiated? Sure. Yes. My apologies. Yep. Councillor Paleshi.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I missed my consent. I'd like to withdraw 7.3.
Okay. 7.3 is moved from consent. Do I need a motion, Peter? No. Yeah, okay. That's fine. Okay, thank you, Councillor Palacio. Oh, Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for confirmation, so did we add 8.1 into consent?
Yes, we did.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we go on to statutory public meetings. Are there any members of the audience that would like to hear a presentation on item 4.1 regarding the city-initiated draft official plan amendment measuring the sustainability of new development? No, so I think we can adjourn that. Is there anyone here for item 4.2 that would like to hear a presentation? 4.2 regarding the application to amend the zoning bylaw, Weston Consulting Incorporated, 45 West Drive, north of Arenda Road. No, okay. Oh, is there? Yep, okay. Item 4.3, is there anyone in the audience that would like to hear a presentation on the application to amend the zoning bylaw to permit higher density mixed-use development, 253 Queen Street East? Yep, okay. Item 4.4, is there anyone in the audience that would like to hear a presentation on item 4.4 regarding the application to amend the official plan zoning bylaw to permit motor vehicles leasing rental establishment? No. Okay, so we'll adjourn that. Okay, so we go on now to then item 4.2. No one wants a presentation.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee, members of the public. My name is Stephen Dykstra. I'm the development planner that's responsible for this application. I'm going to be speaking to the technical aspects of this project. This site is located approximately, it's surrounded by Dixie Road, Orenda Road, West Drive, obviously, and Clark Boulevard. It's located west of the Rogers Communication Corporate Office, and it's directly south of a water course. This application is for an industrial building of approximately 109,000 square feet. There's 2 accesses proposed along West Drive, 142 parking spaces, and approximately 300 jobs that are proposed as part of this. Here's an image of the facade that's proposed. And here's the circulation of the public notice, which is 200 feet or 240 meters. Highlights of the proposal, as I've mentioned, it's for a food processing plant, and that's why it's before us today, or it's before development, because it has to go through rezoning. Today we're here as part of the public meeting, which is part of the process of development applications. As you can see, amendments aren't required for the PPS, the regional official plan, the city official plan, or secondary plan. This application requires a rezoning though. It's designated industrial in the official plan. And in the secondary plan, which is called Highway 410 and Steeles, it's designated prestige employment, which according to our policies, it does not require an amendment. Within the zoning bylaw, however, the zone does not allow for, or it does not include food processing at this time. And so that's what they'll be adding. There's some nuances at the end of the zone as well that we're going to tweak as part of this. I included this slide because in our initial analysis, it was located within the floodplain, but through the TRCA, they noted that it was not located within the floodplain after further analysis. So as we go through this project, some of the highlights that we've identified of issues, we want to continue to ensure that it complies with our guidelines. Another aspect is the access. So currently, the proposal includes 2 access points. Transportation plan is reviewing that, and we're looking to potentially reduce that to 1 access. And as mentioned before, it was located with a floodplain, but working with the TRCA. And with the reports that were provided, it appears as though it's not part of a floodplain. Again, further analysis is going to be completed on that. So now we're done, as part of the public meeting, then after that, we'll be doing, if there's any additional comments from the public or from technical comments or from the committee, then we'll address those, and then eventually we'll potentially get to a recommendation report, and then there'd be appeal period after that. This is, again, ending with the slide of what it looks like, or what the proposal is. And here's a slide for the additional information. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Is the applicant, would you like to speak? Yep, please. And for those who want to delegate on this item, feel free to sign into the delegation book, and you will have 5 minutes to delegate.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, committee members, staff, and members of the public. My name is AJ Taylor. I'm from Weston Consulting. I am the planner on the file, acting on behalf of our client, CapLink Limited, the owner of 45 West Drive. We have reviewed the presentation prepared by planning staff and have no additional information to add. One thing I would like to note is that the subject property is zoned M1A Industrial 1A zone, which does permit food processing facility. The exception does not permit for food processing facility. So our zoning bylaw amendment is proposed to revert back to the M1A zone. I'd be happy to answer any further questions or comments from staff or the public if anyone has any. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone from the public? I see nobody. Members of committee, are there any questions or comments? Or questions, sorry. No? Okay, can I get a motion to move staff report? Moved by Councillor Santos. All in favor? Carried, thank you. Our next item is 4.3.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and members of the public. My name is David Vandenberg. I am the planner assigned to the processing and reviewing this application submitted for a proposed mixed-use, high-density development. The purpose of this public meeting is to provide information on it and seek feedback on the application. First, the property is located in Ward 3 at 253 Queen Street East, as shown on the location map on the slide. It is on the south side of Queen between Hanson Road and Rutherford Avenue. The site is 1.6 hectares or 3.9 acres in size. The applicant is generally proposing to develop a mixed-use development with 3 high-rise buildings, which I'll go into more detail later in the presentation. The application before us tonight is for an amendment to the zoning bylaw to facilitate this development. As to where we are in the process, this application was deemed complete on April 10th. It has been circulated for review to commenting departments and agencies. Public notice of the meeting was provided in the newspaper Guardian on May 23. As shown on the map on this slide, the public notice, direct mail notice, was also given to all property owners with 240 meters. As to the area context, the site is currently occupied by a one-story commercial building, which would be demolished as part of this application. The land uses along Queen Street are predominantly low-rise commercial buildings, with some properties such as the 14-story building at Queen and Hanson at the southwest corner having been redeveloped for higher density uses. To the south of the site, there is a watercourse beyond which are industrial uses. This slide shows a bird's eye view of the property, which is generally located in the middle of the slide, and which more clearly shows the type of uses that are in the area, including the 14-story building at Queen and Hanson. The plan is for the proposed developments depicted on this slide. It includes 3 high-rise buildings to be constructed over 2 phases. Phase 1 is located on the southern part of the property and includes a 30-story tower constructed on top of a podium. Phase 2 would be located on the northern portion of the property and includes a 46-story and a 32-story tower with the podium joining the 2 towers. Other noteworthy details for the application are that it includes a total of 998 residential dwelling units. The total residential, commercial, and residential floor area is 92,242 square meters, so about 990,000 square feet, with residential uses being the predominant use within the building. There are 1,272 parking spaces proposed in underground parking and above ground parking structures, and 850 parking spaces. And in between Tower B and A, there is land that's been identified to be conveyed to the city for a future east-west road through the site. So this slide shows a rendering of the proposed development. In it you can see the 3 towers along with the podiums connecting them. And also, as you can see, the applicant has ghosted in future potential development that may occur in this area. In the next part of my presentation, I'll be discussing the planning framework. The subject application is being reviewed for consistency with the provincial policy statement and conformity with the provincial growth plan and other relevant provincial policies and the regional and city official plans. As far as the official plan, the property is designated as central area, and it is located in the city's urban growth center. The official plan states that the vision for the central area and urban growth center is to continue reinforcing its role as a focal area for investment in institutional and region-wide public services, as well as commercial, recreation, culture, and entertainment uses. The central area is a major preferred location for investment and intensification, permitting a full range of office, retail, commercial, and service activities. A vibrant mixed-use urban growth center will include planning to achieve a minimum gross density of 200 people and jobs combined per hectare. In the Queen Street Corridor Secondary Plan, the subject property is designated Central Area Mixed Use. This designation is intended to accommodate mixed-use developments, including residential, retail, and office uses. The maximum density in this area is an overall floor space index, that being the ratio of building area to site area of 3.5 and 2.0 for residential uses. I would note that there are provisions in the secondary plan that do allow this density limit to be exceeded through the rezoning process and without an amendment to the secondary plan being required. One other notable aspect of the secondary plan is that it does identify 2 new roads within the Queen Street, Hanson Road, the Queen Street, Hanson, and Rutherford Road block. These are shown on the attached slide. One would be a north-south road connecting Queen and a future proposed extension between Clark and Eastern Avenue, and the second being an east-west road between Hanson and Rutherford. And the secondary plan requires the proponents of development applications to convey lands necessary for these roads and to build and to provide financial contributions for them. In the zoning bylaw, the property is zoned service commercial section 3550, and this zone allows either a low-rise commercial development or a high-density mixed-use development with a maximum floor space index of 3.5, and an amendment to the zoning bylaw is required. And some of the notable features for that amendment include a maximum floor space index of 5.82, so exceeding the 3.5 that's in place right now, a maximum building height of 46 stories, a minimum parking rate of 0.95 spaces per unit plus 0.15 for spaces per unit for visitor parking, and minimum requirements for bicycle parking. There are a number of specific issues that staff have identified in this file, in addition to the general assessment of the proposed land use and its impact on the surrounding neighborhood. These issues include the appropriateness of the proposed density and height, including whether the development can be appropriately integrated into the planned overall development pattern, the impact on servicing for the overall area, and the impact on the ability for adjacent lands to develop in accordance with secondary plan policies. The second issue is the impact of the development on the environmental features, particularly the watercourse that's located to the south of the site, and the appropriateness of the proposed mitigation measures. And the third issue is determining the location of the new east-west and north-south road that are identified in the secondary plan. The next steps for the application are that staff will continue to review it, including the review and the comments from the public that I received today, and technical comments, and then staff will advance the final recommendation report to council for a decision, and the issues raised at this meeting will be addressed in that recommendation report. As a note for anyone who has spoken or provided comments in writing, we will be providing you notice of when that report is going forward. So, a couple of final notes that this report associated with tonight's meeting is available online, and the presentation will be posted on our website shortly as well. And again, my name is David Vanderberg. My contact information is on the screen. If people want to provide comments in writing, they can do so by emailing them to me or sending a letter. And the applicant is Weston Consulting, and the contact there is Julia Pearden. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Would someone on behalf of the applicant like to speak? Yes, please. I'll take questions after.
Good evening, Chair, members of committee, and members of the public. My name is Julia Pearden. I'm a land use planner with Weston Consulting, representing the applicant for this project at 253 Queen Street East. I have here with me the project architect, Richard Witt from Quadrangle, as well as the applicant, Maddie from New Developments. We prepared a presentation for you this evening which focuses on the urban design and architectural considerations for the project. And we're excited to share with you details of this project, which will set the table for future development and provide an iconic landmark along the Queen Street corridor. I will pass it off to Richard to discuss the design details of the project.
Thank you very much. So we've already looked at the site, so I won't belabor it, but here's some aerial views demonstrating the context in which the site exists. And zooming in, you've just seen that from David's presentation, but the site is primarily north-south with an east-west kind of leg at the bottom and a new road identified to go through the site in an east-west direction. The design challenge that we had for this project is to design a feasible and truly mixed-use development with active grade-related uses within a very narrow and deep suburban city block. The first thing which we are addressing is how to accommodate the future new east-west 20-meter right-of-way and how that can enable the plans for the entire area to develop. The second one is to articulate the podium massing and establish some active edges at grade, which I'm going to talk a bit more about on all the different sides of the site. The third is to develop the architectural expression so that the different uses on the site are expressed and celebrated. So the first one is the landscape. We really, for these projects of this kind of scale, we really start very much with the ground plane. It's of most interest to us that if the ground plane is going to work, then the rest of the site will also function very well. The second thing is how we're going to integrate the parking, which is there's some above grade parking, but is encased within surrounding elements. Also, in addition to doing that, we're also creating different identities within the podium, which are going to reinforce the street and reinforce the semi-public areas within the site. We also are making a truly mixed-use area, which has retail at grade as well as some office space above it along Queen Street. Our feeling is that this is a very future-oriented site, and we want to set this site up to be a catalyst for the development of the area with all the right things, and that includes reinforcing the best qualities of public realm. We have also into the site, we have a series of townhouses and sort of grade-related units which animate the kind of semi-public area, providing natural surveillance, eyes on the street, and general animation. And then we have 3 towers, so it's always a question how to articulate 3 towers, what's the level of commonality and what's the level of differentiation. So the first one we've identified as the work tower, and we call it that because it has office at the base and it's also on the Queen Street, and most people who would drive down Queen Street, this is the tower that they would see and the podium, the building that they would most relate to. The second one we've called Fabric, which really means it's a bit quieter and it sits at the rear of the site. And then the third one is the playful one, what we've called the Play Tower, which is a kind of an icon to the city. Our feeling is this site wants something that will kind of be an icon for progress of evolution in Brampton. So you can see here sort of a very I mean, you're never going to see it from this unless you've got a helicopter. You're never going to see this view, but this is a view from the east looking across, and you can see what we call the work tower on the right there. The Play Tower is the taller, kind of more playful one in the middle, and the Fabric Tower to the left. This is a site plan showing the tops of the roofs and also the way that the site functions. You can see to the left there's a kind of a smaller laneway, so every site needs to be serviced, needs the garbage to get out, loading to occur. We've prioritized that to the kind of secondary area on the left, which frees up the ground plane on the right for more active areas. So you can imagine people walking there, children playing. You can see there's, especially in the area where the new Future Road is, there's a lot of kind of areas for playing and recreation, but also all the way along, I'm not going to point with this, but no, it doesn't focus on the screen, but you can see the areas where I identified townhouses before. Those would spill out into kind of nicely landscaped areas. And this is the plan, which is a little bit hard to read it there, but you can see all the retail along Queen Street, which is the sort of lighter yellow color at the top, and then the other yellow color is the townhouses, which would animate the public realm there. This is a view looking along the new east-west street. You can see very generous landscaping, lots of kind of active edges and doors opening out onto the street, places for people to inhabit. The way that moving on to the way that we've chosen to, or been pursuing articulating the towers is a kind of pursuing some kind of area of commonality in terms of material, but differentiation in terms of how they're articulated. So like I said, the live, play, work, this is one of the 3D, this is not what we have at the moment, but this is one of the earlier 3D print studies that we did for the towers, so did a number of these. But the Fabric Tower is the one I said to the south. That's the one, it's kind of quieter at the back. It has a very simple sort of variegated grid, which you can see there through this sort of masonry element. This is not dissimilar in terms of its materiality, although it is a slightly different color, but also just has one move, so it's tall, it's iconic, it's playful. And then what we've called the work tower is to the north, is also it's kind of business classic, it's elegant, it's quite light. And you can see, again, this view of all of the towers from a different view, looking along the east-west street. And again, the aerial view looking west. When we've been working on the towers, we've been very mindful of the kind of areas of sustainable design. One of the biggest things that we've done is to change the aesthetic from what is very commonly seen as a very glossy towers to much more solid and masonry. That's the single biggest thing we can do to improve the quality of the buildings, is to reduce the window to wall ratio. There's many other things which we will be pursuing as we move through the project, but for now I think you can see how that agenda is immediately informing the aesthetics. Here's another view from Queen Street East, and the view that most people will see with the hopefully future LRT, quite an elegant kind of commercial building fronting onto Queen Street, and you can see the view there down into the Fabric building. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to, yes, come forward? If you can just sign in at the delegation book. Okay, excellent. Welcome. Just state your name and address for purposes.
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I live in Ward 3. I don't live near this, but I work within about 400 meters of it. So I took an interest in this project. The location seems kind of weird between Rutherford and Hanson, but when you actually look at it, it's approximately halfway between downtown Brampton and Bramalea City Center. So in terms of location, it's actually situated pretty well. It's relatively close to the highway, so it has access there. And unlike Bramalea City Center and downtown, it's not in the floodplain, which is beneficial to it. There's car dealerships north of that. Within the last couple months, I believe it was, you approved a plan, or you pushed forward the idea of having a bunch of that stuff moved to 410 and Dixie. So when you have residential here, this can act as a nice anchor for that. And that would make it look much nicer than what currently exists as someone who deals with it, with walking around that area basically every weekday as I work near there. So the fact that they decided to make it masonry instead of the boring just glass everywhere is actually a nice touch. The tallest building is more than 50% taller than the current existing building. I think our current tallest one's like in the high 27, it's in the high 20s. And so the ones in the 30s aren't that different, but the one that's over 45, I think it is, it's a bit taller, but once the area fills in, it will actually probably fit in. It is a really weird shaped site, I gotta admit. And then there is that weird road, and then the second thing behind it. But then below that, you have another separate section for the property below that, where you have a road running along it. So overall, the site seems to be pretty well laid out. Okay. Yes, in general, I think the project is a very good idea and would be a good step for Brampton. Most of the assessments on how much office space Brampton has in buildings that are more than 20,000 square feet of office show Brampton, I think it was 1 million square feet. So having an extra 87,000 added would be a substantial improvement in terms of office jobs for the city. I think this would be very good for the city.
Thank you, Sylvia. Now I see members of committee. If you have any questions, Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions of staff. Staff pointed out that the density for the site is going to be approximately 200 persons / jobs per hectare. Is that what I heard during the presentation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the reference to 200 people plus jobs per hectare is the minimum target set for the urban growth center. So in this case, the measure used to measure the density was floor space index, the ratio of this building area to the site area, and what is being proposed is an FSI of 5.82.
Thank you. So normally when I see numbers with respect to density, I see it posted as number of people per square kilometer. Approximately what, and if you can't provide this answer today, perhaps in the future we'd like to know, once this is all built, what would be the density approximately of the entire project? My next question would be with respect to the amount of green space around the buildings. Would the roof, is it possible that the rooftop would provide additional potential for green space for residents? And finally, my last question would have to do with respect to parking. What are the parking minimums that we are looking for in this proposal? And would they be appropriate considering that this development is located on a important transit corridor? And could we allow or even encourage for the parking minimums to be different from the minimum? In other words, less.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as far as the density, I just did a quick calculation as far as the density per acre. So they're proposing 998 units. The site area is 3.93 acres. So that comes out to about 254 units per acre. As far as the parking, the application, they are proposing a reduced parking rate as compared to what the zoning bylaw requires as a standard. The secondary plan policies do recognizing the intended urban condition and the transit infrastructure do encourage more flexible parking standards in this area. The applicant has submitted a parking study with this application that's going through the review process right now, and we'll be addressing that in the recommendation report. I think the last question is about the rooftop amenities, and that is something that would continue to be addressed moving forward with the application. If there's possibilities for, and there may be already some provided, but that would be addressed through the forthcoming review of the application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Vicente. No further questions? Can I get someone to move staff report? Councillor Bowman, all in favor? Carried, thank you. 4.4, there's no questions. So now we go to delegation 5.1. Can I call Sylvia Roberts, please?
All right, so this is on the student housing report before you.
So thank you, sorry Sylvia, just a reminder for anyone following, so delegation 5.1 is in relation to item 7.4, City of Brampton initiated student housing policy review and upcoming rental protection policy review. Sorry about that, Sylvia, please.
Okay, this is not full screen, so how do I deal with this? It's running off separate computer. All right, so the current situation, so I live in Ward 3, and I'm sure the councilors from Ward 3 and 4 are aware that we're now getting a major rooming house situation there. And before that, I lived with my grandparents, helping take care of my grandparents in Ward 4, fairly close to Sheridan College, and there's also a million rooming houses and stuff there. We have a very low vacancy rate, below 2%. I think the last time we had anything vaguely resembling 3% was more than a decade ago when a whole bunch of new rentals was put on the market. The situation has continued to deteriorate, and now I'm sure the councilors for 3 and 4 know you're regularly finding rooming houses with a dozen people in 3 or 4 bedroom, or sorry, a dozen people in a 3 or 4 bedroom, which is deeply concerning, and there really isn't a way to make that safe, especially with all of the modifications that definitely weren't up to code. So future trends. We've had a major increase in foreign students for Sheridan College, and the forecast from the provincial government is good news, more. So there were domestic tuition cuts. That might not seem relevant to it, but what's been going on is the province has been underfunding education at the post-secondary level for over a decade, and in response, schools have continued to hike tuition rates, and also some for domestic students, as I'm personally experiencing, but then also they have been increasing a substantial number of foreign students. So UTM, for example, depending on the course, in your second year, you're paying $60,000 a year for a tuition. That's how they're making up this gap. So we're looking at even more foreign students, and we don't have the housing stock to actually deal with that. So what's going on in a lot of cities that are considered college towns, I know Brampton doesn't think of itself like that, but we have Algoma in downtown, We have Sheridan College. There's people who go to Square One, where the Sheridan HMC campus is. There's also York University, where lots of students go along Queen Street to get there. Then you have Humber, also along Steeles, in university towns, which is, we have a number of those issues. There's been increased demand for housing, and it's been met by two major sources: REITs, real estate investment trusts, and condo investors. The issue with condo investors is you'll have a building that's got a dozen or more owners there, and if there's a pest issue, it's very difficult to resolve. See almost any condo building along here, Ontario. In Mississauga, if you talk to an exterminator, they're like, you ask them which ones don't have pests, and they laugh at you because they all have pests. Because that's one of the issues with the condo investor. An REIT, it's a single owner, and therefore has the ability to easily and thoroughly take care of the issue. So the major axes for transportation, in this report it talks about carpooling, but the reality is if you talk to Brampton Transit, they're actually getting around by bus. So you have York along Queen, you have Algoma to the west side of Queen, Humber is the east side of Steeles, Sheridan is the west side of Steeles, and then you have Maine, which joins the two and also connects to Algoma, and HMC in Mississauga. So you really do want to put housing there, unless you all want a whole bunch of young adults with low experience of driving, especially in developed country standards. You probably don't want that, so if they have to get somewhere, the bus is your safest bet. So if the city actually took steps to do it, such as talking to major REITs, you do have to. You have RioCan, which is at Steeles and Maine with their Shoppers World site, and they could look to expand elsewhere along that area. And then you have Moorguard at Bramalea City Centre, which is also very well situated for that housing market. If you talk to them, for REITs, it's actually very popular to get into student housing because you basically have a stable stock of students, and if they're foreign students, they have parental backstops in order to afford all this stuff. So that could be very beneficial for the city, and you really do need to look at how do you deal with the shortage issue. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I see no questions. Thank you. At this time, members of the committee, I'd like to bring forward reports. A motion to receive the delegation by Sylvia Roberts, moved by Councillor Williams. All in favor? Carried. And at this time, we'll bring up the staff report 7.4. I see Councillor Williams on the board.
Thank you through you, Chair. I just have a question to staff. Great report. Thank you for bringing this. You know, when we talk about Sheridan and providing educational support, various stakeholders, do we have any idea of their statistics, their data on how many students have maybe come to them with concerns about rooming houses, or how many students have come to them saying they are looking for residence or a place to live?
Through the chair, we have, I did deal with Sheridan College, looking at their admissions and asking about the residents, just kind of getting some numbers and stats. And they basically indicated that they do provide adequate housing. They've never been at full capacity, but we've never received any information from them regarding concerns regarding finding safe housing. We are looking at measures of partnering up with Sheridan College, and I'm aware that zoning services, along with enforcement, did conduct a public outreach session for the first time at Sheridan College, offering students information regarding illegal lodging units and their safety and what measures they could put in place to finding safe units. So they were providing that as background.
So thank you. So when they are providing some background to the students, what has the discussion sounded like? Are students concerned? Have they brought up any issues? And it's not just with Sheridan, because I know we have Algoma and Ryerson and other universities and post-secondary school. So has there been concerns from the students being addressed at some of these meetings?
Through the chair, I'd like to defer to zoning, Elizabeth Corazola, because she actually, I believe, attended the session and she would have more input on the direct conversation she's had with the students, because I was not present at the session itself. I'm not sure whether she'd be able to expand on that. Oh, you were not there, sorry, I thought she was there. Maybe someone, sorry, I apologize.
No problem.
I thought she was there at the outreach session. So I'm not aware of any particular individual discussions.
Okay. I'm just also curious around, you know, from bylaw complaints, when we have residents calling in about a rooming house, are those complaints and concerns, are they actual students that are renting, or like, what do the inhabitants like look like?
Through the chair, I'll just defer this to John Edward from Enforcement to speak.
Welcome, John.
Hi, John. Thanks.
Well, through the chair. Sorry, if you could just repeat the question one more time, I was...
Sure. So from the bylaw complaints that we have about rooming houses, when there is an investigation, are they actually students that are taking up most of these complaints that are being people are concerned with?
Through the chair, it'd be hard to properly assess that. There are several students. Not all are international students. Not all are students. We've seen a large uptick in rooming house complaints, lodging house complaints, illegal lodging house complaints throughout the city. They're not necessarily located in the southwest portion of the city.
Right.
They're expanding throughout the city and are very much in the northeast part of the city as well.
Okay.
Sure. And they're everywhere.
And thank you through the chair, and that's my real biggest concern. If we're getting complaints about rooming houses all over the city, but we don't really know if they are actually students, and I'm just wondering how we're able to, you know, kind of get a grasp on, are they students who are renting out these places? Where's the correlation there? I'm just
through the chair, we don't take specific details of the occupants from within the rooming houses. We investigate and enforce dealing with the owners of the property. The information and the interviews, the questioning, witness statements, and that sort of thing taken by officers, by the occupants of the building, often do bring forward instances where they are students, international students, but certainly not in all the cases. I couldn't even say the majority of the cases.
Okay.
It's hard to say because we don't track that type of information.
Right. Okay. All right. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Just anecdotally, I could tell you that Councillor Bowman and myself, and especially Councillor Bowman, has been since 2014, we've been in contact with Sheridan College. We hear anecdotally that many students that live in that Sheridan College area don't necessarily go to Sheridan College, and we know also that there are buses of private career colleges that pick up students at Shoppers World and drop them off, so it is quite complex. So I appreciate the questions, and I know Councillor Bowman has been tackling them for the last 4 years. So I will move on to now Councillor Santos. Okay, Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Chair. During the last year, when Councillor Vicente and I were going door to door in the downtown core in particular, we saw and knocked on many doors of illegal lodging rooming houses that looked like they were international. Well, it seemed that they were international students.
I think we've lost quorum. Is that correct, City Clerk?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there a shame bell? Shame.
Okay, Councillor Santos, please proceed.
So as I was saying, as Councillor Vicente and I were going door to door last year, we saw a lot of rooming houses, many housed international students, and we're seeing an influx. Algoma, as we know, is expanding to 500, potentially 800 students in September, and we keep asking them the question, where are the students going to go? Where are they going to live? Considering the formula is over 70% international students for Algoma. And so I read the report, and there are a few things. For example, I know that it's going to be incredibly costly for us to take a more proactive approach like the city of Guelph has taken. I looked at the numbers, and perhaps it's too much money at this point in time. But one of the things in the report, especially in the first few tables, was reference to steering committees. And this may get to the point of Councillor Williams about what to do and whether or not these are in fact students who are living in these illegal or lodging rooming houses, just to get a better understanding as to where students are living. I actually don't know whether or not these institutions are asking those basic questions as to where these students are going to live in the city of Brampton. And so I'm wondering if and I actually would move that we refer this back to staff, because there are some things that have changed, I think, from some of the assumptions, including Algoma expanding to the downtown core to 800 students potentially in September. But to look at whether or not we should also form, similar to Oshawa, Hamilton, where else did I see in here, Guelph, where they had steering committees that had the various post-secondary institutions at the table with the city and with developers to figure out and map out housing specifically for students. As the city grows to become more of a post-secondary town, we are already short of supply in terms of affordable housing. So I think we could be proactive. So it'd be great to come back with a report that also indicates a recommendation on whether or not we should proceed with that. The other thing is, when we were at FCM, we attended a workshop that Vancouver presented on, specifically on housing and homelessness. And they said that one of their biggest challenges with respect to student housing and affordable housing was Airbnbs. And so I don't know whether or not the Airbnb issue that seems to be growing in the city as well as the region of Peel is captured in this report as well. I don't know if we've cracked that nut yet, but I'm sure it's growing. I know that when we were going door to door, we ran into residents who were complaining about Airbnbs across their street. So those are just kind of my thoughts and some of my questions as well.
So Councillor Santos, are you asking to defer this back?
Refer it back to staff.
Okay. Does staff might want to maybe provide some comments and maybe give a little bit insight on what was the purpose of the report, and maybe, because I know we talked about it and you had talked about that there's still, you know, that's something that staff are going to be continuing to monitor. So maybe you want to comment.
Thanks very much. Through you to the councillor. You know, the crafting of this report took in advice and work with groups from across the corporation, and really touched on a lot of different aspects that relate to some of the pressures we're seeing with housing and the condition of and the impact on some of the neighborhoods. So in terms of enforcement, in terms of, you know, looking at the affordable housing supply and the student housing, all of those things coming together. So the recommendations that are in here are really to say that, you know, we've got some tools that are working. There's other ones that we need to continue to work on. We still will have the internal working group getting together to continue to monitor how things are progressing. And in particular, you know, recommendation number 5 is that we're looking to continue to strengthen the partnerships with the groups. And I'd say some of that work in terms of the affordable housing component, which we don't have specifically in this report, which really wasn't the intention of this report, is going to be covered off through the scope of the affordable housing strategy, which is under development now. So that should be back before you. There'll be an update this fall, and we'll be able to monitor and give update. So I think, you know, in those reports, we can probably respond to the direction that you're looking for.
Great.
And make sure that it's covered off.
Thanks so much, Bob.
Councillor Santos, would you want also for staff to deal with the steering committee maybe in the report, so that's almost direction? Is that fine?
certainly we can look at all those things and the sort of mechanisms and the ongoing tools. So related more to the affordable housing component and how we'd work with the colleges. Is that really the essence of it?
Specifically dealing with student housing and the international student housing needs, because I don't think there's been conversation amongst all the institutions at the same table. You know, Sheridan might be doing something better than Algoma or Ryerson. Like they're not really talking to each other to find a solution on how to house international students or even domestic students who live outside of Brampton coming to the school.
Okay, we can definitely look at that a little more closely.
Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's good to see that we're making some progress after almost 5 years of me banging my head on this issue. It's great to see we're making some progress and that the extent of the problem is being recognized. We talk about licensing here, and other municipalities have licenses, but the costs for the city of Brampton, you know, if you're looking at the licensing program here, hiring one additional property standard officer for every 1,000 units to be inspected. We've got between 20 and 30,000. So that's an awful lot of officers. That's just by law. Then we've got the additional in fire prevention. Same sort of numbers. We're looking at 5 fire prevention officers per 1,000 units. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars. And I think it's safe to say that this has gotten out of control in this city. You know, we have not been able to keep up with the illegal units, with the registering of them, the licensing of them. You guys have done a fantastic job with the committee that was set up in the last term at looking how to get more people registered, and it's working. We're up to, what, 3,500 or something like that, Rick, which is phenomenal. It's great. But we still need to look at the core issue here. Sheridan has its town and gown. Councillor Medeiros and I sit on the Sheridan Town and Gown group. But the issue is that these students, and I believe our delegate Sylvia mentioned it as well, when we're knocking on doors during the election, we're not talking to students who are going to Sheridan. We're talking to students who are going to Humber, who are going to York. They're all living here in this city, and they're in our rooming houses. They're in everywhere. So it's great, you know, to say we need Sheridan at the table and this and that, but this is a problem that extends far, far beyond Sheridan and beyond schools. This is a problem where we've got the private schools, as Councillor Medeiros mentioned. We've got buses for private institutions that pick up bus loads of students every morning that all come from these houses. I don't know what the answer is. I spoke with Mr. Kennard earlier, and I talked about the licensing of them. I don't think it's any secret that a lot of these units have applied for legal status, registered status. Wonderful. And then something happens, a fire starts, whatever. They go in and they find out they don't have just one registered unit now. They've got 3 units, one of them registered. So I don't know what the answer is, and I asked about the possibility of licensing, but not for 1 year, because the costs are truly prohibitive that we've got here. 7 people for every 1,000 inspections of units. That's crazy. But if we were to do something on a 5-year basis, you know, if a person registers for a second unit, and every 5 years, we just go back and check in to make sure that that unit is still to standard, still to code, is the only unit in the house, I would be in favor of something like that. When we get into licensing of rooming houses and boarding houses, that's a completely different issue. I don't think, I would suspect that every one of us here has seen instances of 12, 13, 15 students living in 1, 2, or 3 bedroom house, which is absurd. It's absolutely absurd, and I don't know how we deal with it. The City of St. Catharines put forward an interesting proposal that I was looking at. They brought it forward in January of 2018. And they do license second units in St. Catharines, but they also have a system there of demerit points. And I'm not saying this is the be-all and the end-all, but it might be a starting point where we can look at it. So if a registered unit has 5 complaints about it for noise, for garbage, for excessive number of cars parked in their parking lot, they get demerit points. And once they reach a certain number of demerit points, their license is not renewed. So I don't know if that's legal. I'm looking over at you, Mr. Solicitor. I don't know if it's legal, but it's an interesting proposal. And I'm pleased to share this with staff to see if it's something, even 1 or 2 things that they've listed in here might be a viable option for us, because I think, John, if we've got complaints over and over and over and over for the same addresses, do we not? And we continue to go in there, address the issue, and 6 months later, we have another issue, and we're back again and again and again. So we really have to get a handle on this, and believe me, I feel very, very bad for the foreign students who are coming here. I, for one, if my son were going to a foreign university, I would not appreciate him living in squalor like some of the people do here. And there's definitely landlords that are taking advantage of this situation. Sheridan says we have adequate housing. Sheridan has 300 units for 10 to 12,000 full-time students. I don't think that's adequate, to be honest. So there's a lot of work we need to be doing. I support Councillor Santos in sending this back to be looked at for more options, something we can do. But the numbers, as far as I'm concerned right here, the numbers indicate that we're losing control of this. And if we don't do something quickly, we're going to have major problems. And thank God we haven't had a major fire yet where we've lost 10, 15 lives. But it's going to happen if this continues. So all in favor of sending it back for a second look to see if we can incorporate anything, any best practices. And I know Rick wants to come up and talk about it, so please, Rick, come on up. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor. You've raised obviously some very concerning points. I just wanted to, I guess, separate or get a point of clarification. You do have 2 reports before you, one dealing specifically with the lodging, and a second to deal with the second units in particular. And Councillor Santos has asked that the report be referred back to staff regarding the lodging homes. I think the information that you have in particular speaks to licensing of the second units, which is something we can certainly take back and consider and look, to the merits of implementing something similar in the city of Brampton. And maybe we can speak to that second report a little bit further on a separate note, but I did just want to clarify that there are the 2, I guess, items that we need to delineate between.
No, in my understanding, my understanding is that Councillor Santos agreed that staff would come back with further information in different reports to address these 2 major issues, one being student housing, and the other one was around Airbnbs and so on. That was my understanding. Was that your understanding as well? Yeah. Yeah, Councillor Bowman, did you want to, you still have the floor. Please.
Thanks. Thanks, Rick. Thanks for clarifying that. I'm looking at the 2 reports going back together because I think they go hand in hand. We've got an issue with second units that become lodging houses after the approval of the second unit is given. And we've got an issue with foreign students and all students coming in and creating lodging houses. But, I can't say, and we don't have numbers to say that it's students that are in these lodging houses. I know of lodging houses that are in Councillor Medeiros' wards and my wards It's not students. All of a sudden, 17 adults show up, and 3 months later they're gone, and 17 new adults show up again. So I think it's an issue that we need to put these two together somehow. They are separate, but we need to be looking this holistically as a major problem that we've got.
Through you, Mr. Chair, would you mind if I made the suggestion that you consider the report on the second unit registration bylaw separately in order for us to implement some of the policy changes that we've recommended to ease the process and to match up with some of the internal business processes that we've changed this year, and allow us to move forward with that, I guess, new business process for second unit registration specifically. And at the same time, we can go back with this lodging house issue and look at the overall, bigger picture and decide how we can move forward with both of them together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so is the referral back on the board, Councillor Santos? Just to be clear, when members are speaking to referral, or is it just direction back? Okay, so we do have a referral on the floor. Councillor Williams, I'm going to go to Councillor Fortini, hasn't had the opportunity to speak yet.
Okay.
Councillor Fortini.
Thank you, through the chair, and I'll support the referral. And speaking to referral, I got one of these rooming house in the M section, another one, I was just there last week with a bunch of residents. We're wasting a lot of time from bylaws and property standards when they're trying to do their best, and then they're gone and they keep coming. Garbage was all over the backyard, all over. Mostly in the second units, where our problem is the parking. That's where we can't get permits out. Now, you look at Toronto or other municipalities, they have no pets, no smoking, no parking. I don't see why we have to provide the parking. If they park on the road, they're not allowed. That's up between them. Mississauga's passed a bylaw, and we were talking about this a while back in Toronto. I think they got an appeal at the OMB that you're not allowed to rent your house less than 26 days. And it stops also at places like Airbnb, which I know JP up there, and we had the meeting on that street last year, and it's causing a problem again with the Airbnb, where they rent it and leave garbage there and beer bottles, and people can't enjoy their backyards every weekend. So maybe we can look at on the report, see what happened over there. How Mississauga did in Toronto. I know Toronto, I think they did an appeal on it, but so it's before the OMB, but the one in Mississauga hasn't have an appeal. And look at the Airbnb. You cannot rent your house less than 26 days. And that will help at least the Airbnb in these rooming houses, and then we could actually go after the owner of the house.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly take that back when we look at the options for these reports and report back to you on the feasibility of implementing something similar.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Singh.
Thank you. So just for clarification, we will be sending this, if this motion passes, this will be referred back to staff, but we will continue a discussion on second units after
That's
this?
the next report, 7.5.
Okay. So I guess my comments for this report, it was a good high-level overview, and I could see there was some benchmarking done. But I guess if I look at the two reports, the second report offers some tangibles, like there's 4 suggestions there, and I think that's what we're looking for as councillors. What are the tangibles regarding the student housing issues? So I guess if for when the report comes back, I guess I just want to highlight that some tangible, actionable steps we could take to address student housing would be appreciated. And I'll reserve my comments for the next report after. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you through you, Chair. And, I appreciate Councillor Santos bringing this forward because, I think this is really what we need to get more information. So I'm also wondering if there is a mechanism for us to start recording, houses that are rooming houses, whether or not we're saying, to Ryerson or, where the other universities or colleges that we have many students that are coming from, that are attending your school living in these type of conditions. Because if they're saying that they don't think they have any concerns, or there's no concerns, they have adequate housing, there's a complete miscommunication there. And so I'm really wondering if there is any way that we can start tracking some of the rooming houses complaints, and just kind of getting an idea geographically where the residents are attending, if they're attending school, so that we have something to present some of these colleges and universities to say, like, we actually, our numbers are saying there is a problem. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but I think it would be good for us to start being aware of here at the city, because there's a miscommunication. But I really support this coming back. I really do want to see us getting more of a sense from the students, and from, you know, having a larger conversation around what's driving most of the issues that we're having with the rooming houses. I also really question the awareness of some of the students around what is safe, where they can go, what are their options. So.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams. And as we move to the motion, I believe Councillor Santos, you wanted to include in the refer back, you wanted to include Airbnbs to be looked at as well? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, so if you can be amended to also look at Airbnbs. And I guess the staff, this is maybe, you know, the saying of the wisdom of the chair does speak highly in this moment. As if you remember during our briefing, these were some of the comments that was shared. So I think we take that as a learning, that there is that opportunity. That's why we do that. But you can sense, I think this council is looking for actual strategies and options to come back with. And so I think, is that pretty clear, staff, in terms of direction? In terms of the motion, or would you like further clarification?
I think given the context that we're talking about and the other initiatives that are underway, we can certainly fill this out and come back with something that will respond directly to the actions that you're looking for.
Great, thank you very much. So all in favor to the motion made by Councillor Santos? Okay, carried, thank you very much. We go to now, do I need a, oh no, it's been referred back. So we are now on item 7.5. And I can see everyone chomping at the bit. Councillor Singh.
Sure. Yeah, so I do support these 4 suggestions. So, you know, it's good to see that we're going to be making it a little bit easier for secondary units to register. I know many of my peers are very passionate about getting secondary units registered. I would also like to add some recommendations. Would I be able to add a recommendation? And amend it? Yeah, I'd like to add some amendments.
Okay.
Could I do that now? And I don't think you'll be surprised. So one is look at exploring communication in multiple languages, working with our communications department. And secondly, I would like to look at alternative technologies for plumbing. The technologies for checking the plumbing. We've talked, yeah. Right? Oh, video, X-ray, I don't care. We gotta look at it. Yeah, cameras, yep. And so, in sequence, actually, I think we should look at the alternative plumbing first, and then the communications once we know there is alternative options for the plumbing.
Okay, is that clear? Where would you want that?
I guess in number 4. I guess we could add number 4. Further exploration of whatever the clerk sees fit.
Did you get that, City Clerk? Okay, so I'll move on to then Councillor Fortini.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought we were on second units already. I asked before.
No, we are
We are on now, the last one. So I look at the 4. I think, Rick, we already talked about electrical. Now, I know that's a very big safety concern on aluminum wires and the way it's done. But how do we pass this inspection ourselves when it has nothing to do with the city?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
You're correct. It is outside of our jurisdiction to inspect and pass any sort of electrical work. It is under the purview of the Electrical Safety Authority. It was previous council's direction to ensure that we received an ESA certificate from the Electrical Safety Authority prior to registration of the second unit. What we're suggesting here is to allow the homeowner a second option of getting an inspection done by a qualified electrician to give us some sort of assurance that everything looks okay.
Yeah, and that is very important because these aluminum wires, what happens, they get loose in those ruts, and that's where it causes the shorts and catch fire. That is good. Second one is, I'm glad he brought it up, Councilor Singh here. I know some people have a beautiful basement apartment. We're telling them we have to break up the wall to check the plumbing. We have cameras to go inside, and they could actually see. And I see a beautiful kitchen, and the guy couldn't get his permit because he wanted to rip everything out. And again, and on the parking. Like, we gotta look at the parking. That's the main concern. I know this senior, and he cannot get it because he doesn't have the parking. He's got a single garage, and he doesn't have a car. So, but you have to provide 2 parking spots. He could rent it to another senior that doesn't drive. So, so we gotta look at the parking. That's the main concern. If we make it a little bit easier, we might get more people registered.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't disagree with that, and there are options to, especially along, major transit corridors, to provide a lesser requirement for parking. Yeah. Unfortunately, the registration bylaw doesn't give us the avenue to make changes to that. We have to change that requirement through the zoning bylaw. So what we've done is we've taken that recommendation or that request to look into the parking requirements, and we've brought it on board with the zoning bylaw review. So when we come forward with recommendations to change the zoning bylaw, we will make some recommendations with respect to parking for second use.
So you get regular, let's say that we have 2 kids, I have 4 cars in my driveway, and I'm using where the shallow valve is, I'm using the city property because it's further in. I'm still using it, so what's the difference if it's my kid or it's a basement at the end of the day? Same thing. Say you got 4 cars, you got 4 cars after. One's you're collecting rent, one's your own child. So it makes no difference. We're still using it. Yeah, good.
Thank you, Councillor Fortuna. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had some, comments on the requirement for the electrical safety inspection. My understanding is that once ESA permit has been obtained by either the homeowner who is doing the work themselves or by a qualified and licensed electrical contractor, it is the ESA's responsibility to ensure that all of the work was done correctly, and it is their responsibility to follow up on that open permit. Would that be correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct, Councillor. This is the only process by which the city has any involvement in ESA. For any other construction, even for new homes, we don't require any sort of certification. It is the jurisdiction of ESA, and they do follow through with their required inspections and certification. So that is 100% correct.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, for members of council to know, the ESA has a process that is in place to follow up on open permits, and either the homeowner or the contractor is required to comply with their process, and in any situation where they do not comply, the ESA has the power to disconnect the electrical power to that building. And in the case of where it's the electrical contractor who has not followed up to ensure that an inspection is done, the ESA has the power to not allow that contractor's license to be renewed or to be active. And so I think that there are substantial protections on the ESA side to ensure that the work gets done correctly. But I do believe that as the only step in our process here at the city, perhaps is to verify that an ESA permit was sought as a minimum level of requirement for us to ensure that whether it's the homeowner doing the work or they are hiring an external contractor, a licensed contractor, to do that work, that a permit was obtained by the ESA. And then once that has been done by the city, we are essentially assuring ourselves that the ESA will be following up to make sure that that unit is safe once all of the work is complete. Would that be, to staff, would that be possible and acceptable?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, I'm not entirely sure what sort of infrastructure ESA has to make that process easy for us. I don't know if we can, access their database or log into a website and check that. But further to that, there are also circumstances that you may not have considered, that the construction is existing and they're converting, for all intents and purposes, an existing finished basement into a second unit. And in those cases, there is no electrical work being done. And so there may not be an ESA permit pulled whatsoever. What we've attempted to do here was sort of satisfy both the requirement to ensure some sort of minimum level of safety by giving the homeowner the option to either go to ESA for a certificate or to go to a private electrician to inspect the wiring and provide a certificate to us to confirm that everything's okay. Just in the absence of there being a robust system to allow us to work back and forth between the ESA's database and our own.
Then I will leave it to staff's discretion on the wisdom of that choice, but it seems to me that if any electrical work is to be done on a property, and that would certainly be indicated in the application to the city, it would be easy for us to require that either the homeowner or through the electrical contractor, through the homeowner, to provide us with a copy of that open permit. My other question has to do with parking. One of the most obvious signs that a second unit is active or in place within a neighborhood is the kind of, I use the word shenanigans, around parking out front of the property or on the street. I think there are many cases that we've seen in the past where a second unit is located relatively close to transit. Would it be possible for the city to look at a situation where if an applicant can make a case that additional parking for that second unit is not needed, seeing as they would have the option of ensuring that when they lease to a prospective tenant, that they would lease the unit on the condition that no parking is available? Would that be something that we can do as a council, as a city, to first of all address the parking where no parking is available or insufficient parking is available, but also to encourage the creation of more units that are not necessarily dependent on the occupant having a car. As an additional measure, I know that when an individual who is applying for a second unit has to provide sufficient parking spaces, does the city, when approving a second unit application, assign a total number of vehicles that can be parked in front of that property?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, I'll answer the first question about the decision with respect to parking. And that is, again, something that we can't regulate through the registration bylaw, but something that we can put provisions in place for in the zoning bylaw. So we will take that advice or that suggestion, and we will consider that and bring recommendations back to the committee with the zoning bylaw review process. With respect to the number of spaces, essentially those, again, are regulated through the zoning bylaw. It is required for most dwellings that you have, for the primary dwelling, 2 spaces and 1 additional for the second unit. You wouldn't necessarily, or it isn't currently limited to the number of parking provided if you have the space. So, I mean, if you have a driveway that could accommodate 6 full-size parking spaces, then, you know, you're free to do so. But we do set a minimum, so 2 for the primary dwelling unit and 1 for the secondary.
So is it possible for the city to, on a case-by-case basis, when a second unit is approved to proceed, to set a limit on how many vehicles fit in front of that home? And that is the number that bylaw would use if they're driving around and reviewing potential parking infractions, being able to determine whether or not the homeowner and the tenants are complying with what that property can accommodate. In other words, can we assign a number to a property that has a second unit?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's something that we would have to take a look into, whether or not that would be a possibility. I don't know that I could answer one way or the other at this point in time.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just because, as you say, if the homeowner needs to have 2 vehicles and then the rental requires 1 more, that's 3. But to your point, that property may have room for 5 or for 6. Then forevermore, if the number 6 in this example is associated with that property and by law are receiving reports that there are infractions there, they determine that there are 8 cars somehow squeezed onto the parcel, then.
And through you, Mr. Chair, so would you be looking specifically to regulate the additional parking for that second unit or for the lot overall?
The lot overall.
And in that case, I mean, right now, obviously, there's nothing in place, but we would have to look very carefully at what that scheme would look like. I mean, you know, there's a lot of families these days who, you know, if you have 2 older kids and you're fortunate enough to be able to afford to buy them a car, you may have 4 cars in your parking lot that legitimately belong to you, and then possibly an additional 1 or 2 for a second unit if the space would allow. But we can certainly look at options and report back.
Just because, as we've had many discussions here in council, we often find that when parking is overflowing onto the street, it creates a whole host of issues on their own, and there's no more sure sign that you have illegal units in a neighborhood than all of the cars that are parked on the street past 2 a.m. So I think that some of these different ideas should be looked at, and with respect to the no parking being required at all, I think we find a lot of situations where a property has all of the necessary qualifications to have a second unit built, which we all want to promote in a safe manner, but they are disqualified because there simply isn't enough space for the 2+1 car. And I think that it's a shame that homeowners can't take advantage of that where they have ready access to transit and could give a tenant the option. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
So Councilor Vicente, would you like to move or amend the direction?
If that is what is, I'm not sure if staff wish to take direction, but if an amendment would be accepted, I would love to see that.
Well, how about then I would suggest maybe you consult with staff and you can come back if you think that an amendment is required or further work is required. But it's up to you.
Yes. Certainly, I would be very interested in adding an amendment for staff to look at whether or not an applicant can make a case that parking is not needed. And with respect to the total number of vehicles on property, I will leave that to staff for them to look at. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to suggest with all due respect, that we leave that particular recommendation off, only because I'd like to isolate the fact that this speaks to, these motions speak directly to the registration bylaw, and these matters that deal with parking relate to the zoning bylaw. And it would be, I think, preferable if we were able to separate the two and have a clean break after this committee meeting with the registration bylaw today, and we can move forward with recommendations brought forward by staff related to parking, specifically with the zoning bylaw, and deal with that as a separate issue.
I'm happy with that, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
thank you, Councillor Vicente. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just wanted to amend number 5, change it to explore and report back for Q3 2019, just so we can get a little report.
Okay.
Is that okay, Mr.? And how fast will it take to implement from A to C for 2A to C? Once approval today, I just wanted.
Through you, Mr. Chair. With the approval of the committee and ratification by council, it's done.
Good, okay, because I have a lot of cases, so this will help them out. All right, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fortini.
Okay, just a quick question. When someone brings an application in, how long does it take before we are called in and say, this is what we needed, this is what you missed it? Usually.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
3 months? 3, 4 months?
Well, it's typically, the legislated review timeframe for these applications is 15 business days.
Oh, that quick. I thought it was...
So it is 3 weeks. Having said that, you know, the volume that we're dealing with right now is extraordinary. And so I do have to admit that 15 business day review period is probably not being met on average.
I thought it was 3 months.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion, or we actually have a motion by Councillor Singh to approve staff recommendations and with amendments. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Members of the committee, I will go now back to item 7.3. My apologies, and I guess as part of the discussion, we moved on to 7.5, and I believe Councillor Paleschi pulled this from consent. Councillor Paleschi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Rob, I went through the report and I see no mention of the aquifer that's running under this development and to the east and coming down to the south. We had a number of issues. I see that the region has comments in there for the developer to continue to monitor the wells in the area for I think a full year after the completion of construction. But with the number of issues that we had last summer and the summer before, we obviously know that there are issues. And I see no mention of us, I don't see a hydrology, requesting a hydrology report, and I see no mention of those issues being resolved at all.
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, there's a requirement for the applicant to submit appropriate studies, of which would look at the aquifers. Based on the submissions that were provided for this 8-lot plan of subdivision, I had no concerns brought back to me or comments from the various departments that reflected that there would be a need to look further beyond what studies were submitted.
Okay. Is hydrology study one of those studies that needs to be done?
In addition, just before I answer that, through you, Mr. Chairman, the applicant, although this is a very small plan of subdivision,
yes,
the applicant, Great Gulf, who owns these lands now, also owns the surrounding lands to the east, north, and to the south. Yes. And they would have been required to have submitted, if not through this application, through the previous applications, detailed studies that would have looked at the area and would have likely included these lands as well. So I'm pretty sure that they would have had to have submitted studies that would have addressed this. They're looking towards actually starting construction probably in the new year for the surrounding lands here. So they would have had to have undertaken these studies.
So, and those, so those applications are already approved. I guess what I'm looking for is, and maybe, maybe something can come back, for council when the minutes come to council, this Wednesday, if possible. If not, then, a subsequent council meeting. And I know the developer last summer had to deliver water to many houses because wells went dry. So if we can look into that as well. And then also with the other applications, any of the studies, and I don't recall the company that was hired to monitor, but if we can maybe just bring back some information from them or updated to members of council and to myself. And sorry for pulling this on the last minute.
Okay.
I didn't give you any heads up, and I apologize for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So Councillor Palash, would you like to move the report? Oh, just a report back. So we need a motion, Peter?
There are staff recommendations, which are on the screen. So is Councillor Palash moving the staff recommendations plus a
With an
report back
amendment?
on the hydrology as it relates to the?
I'd like to talk to staff, council next week before moving forward. So this isn't, it's ratified at council anyways. So if you can come to council next week, I'm fine with that. If not, then I want it pushed off.
So through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps if committee wishes to deal with the recommendations tonight, they'll go to council this Wednesday. If the answers you're seeking aren't available, then at council on Wednesday, the matter could be referred back.
Okay, sounds good.
So what would you like to do, Councillor Palash?
That, I'll move the recommendations and before it gets ratified.
Okay. So recommendations have been moved by Councillor Palash. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Now we go on to the Fortini Act, driveways. So, Councillor Fortini.
Before I start, Peter, I think I talked to legal about these other two, so I'm gonna withdraw the 5 A's and the one on North Park. I will take that into enclosed on those two. But the driver, I'm still talking about.
Okay, so
Three
you're
items.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, we're on 9.1, which is driveway widenings.
driveway widening.
The second item, which is we're identifying as 9.2, is 2700 to 2670 North Park Drive,
Yeah, I'll withdraw
and
that one.
5 Hazel Glen Court.
And I'll withdraw that one because.
You're withdrawing
before committee.
9.2?
Yeah, and I'll take it in camera on Wednesday. Because they're both before committee adjustments.
So you want to go in camera today?
No, I'll do it on Wednesday. I'll do it on Wednesday. too.
Oh, Wednesday
I
in
talked to
council?
legal, yeah.
Okay, so you've spoken to our legal?
Yes.
Does legal staff, are you familiar with what Councillor Fortini is saying, and are you comfortable with the direction?
So this is the first that I'm hearing about the in-camera session for Wednesday.
I thought we had a discussion because it wasn't, it's a committee, so I'll bring it forward later, and we'll talk later.
Yeah, so through the chair, the two items that were added are matters that are before the Committee of Adjustment tomorrow. And so my advice to the councillor was it'd be inappropriate to add that to the committee agenda today, speak to the matter at the council table or the committee table when it was being considered by the committee. If there's a legitimate reason to have a discussion about items
Well, Councillor Fortini is you've
at
asked for
a later
withdrawal.
point.
No, I did ask, yeah.
And,
Okay.
sorry, through the chair, so
Yeah.
Councillor Fortini, I think correctly suggested that those two items should be withdrawn tonight. In terms of adding items to the agenda for closed session and so on later, that's something obviously through the procedure bylaw, if it's appropriate for things to be added. Really, there's not much for me to say at this point.
Thank you.
That'll go through the usual process is what I would imagine.
Good, at least you got to intervene tonight. So that's a good thing. Now we go back now to
To the
Councillor
driveways,
Fortini
okay.
regarding driveways,
Yeah, so.
commonly known as.
Thank you through the chair. So I think we had a lot of feedback on these driveway issue. So there was a little bit of confusion. I thank staff for doing the work. When I came along with this permit driveway, was the whole idea is to educate the people to not do the wrong thing. And I've asked to look at other municipalities. So Mississauga, I met with, well, I was at Mississauga, and I did meet with regional staff, and they told me what they do there, and also Richmond Hill and all. So they have a bylaw. If you have a 50-foot lot, to give you an example, you need 40% space, green space, and you're allowed 24 feet, exactly like cars. If you do a 30 feet, and you're not over the 20-foot threshold green space, that extra 6 feet by the length, you pay a fine or every year at the region because the water goes in our drains. They do not cut driveways unless, so long as they leave 20% green space. So now we're asking for permits and surveys and all this. So we cause more of a problem than it was before because some of the lots don't have surveys. Now you could go get the survey at our planning if it's there. Sometimes it's not there. So that means another $1,200 to $1,800 getting a survey. I don't see why. The whole idea was a permit. You fill in a paper, and they say this is what you could do. That is it. You don't have to go through all these problems. So I want to bring it back. I want to see what Mississauga does and these other two things, and do the exact same thing. You know, not cut driveways. So long as they leave 20% green space, that is fine.
Staff, yeah.
40%, sorry, 40% green space, not 20.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Fortini. So staff had looked through the report that we had brought forward for council relating to driveways and driveway permits. We had looked at other municipalities. I can't comment specifically on the matters that Councillor Fortini is referencing now, but really what I'm hearing is that there's a way in which they can be looked at and applied, whereby there's some fees that are associated with a residence if there is a certain amount of impervious surface area there. That is a matter that our engineering group is currently looking at. And so it's a city initiative that really has been applied there and been applied in Mississauga as well, I'm understanding. And it's something that our staff are looking at here. That matter of engineering, I think, like together with the zoning bylaw comprehensive review that planning staff are looking at as well, I think may go a long way towards implementing ultimately some elements like that council would be appreciative of. But those things are not really associated with the bylaw permit report that we had brought to council previously and received direction on.
Well, I had never heard on the direction about a survey. That was all in the report after, and that's where we're getting a lot of backlash. If I'm removing this driveway the same that I have, and I put the same driveway there, asphalt, you don't need a permit. It's for those people that make it wider. At the region, we had a workshop 2 weeks ago, and they say they pay a fee at the region for the water to go in the drains. And they also have this August, you only allow 50% of your green space in the back. Now the whole backyard in concrete, 50% has to be green space. Now, by the time we work on this, we're going to still continue a lot of problems until next year, 2 years when the new bylaw comes out. I thought that's what we were working on. So July 2nd, with this new bylaw coming out, we're going to get a lot of feedback. So I don't want to put that bylaw through.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the surveys that are required in association with one of the development driveway widening permit applications, we had worked with our engineering group to identify really what administrative requirements we would have and need in order to process an application for one of those driveway widening requests. And engineering had identified that a survey would be best so that we can accurately identify what it is that a resident is wanting to do to the driveway, the extent to which they would widen it, and to understand that in an accurate way so that we have a drawing that is with us that's formal to scale. I'm hearing really that there is some concern that some residents might not be able to provide a survey. So there are a number of ways that residents could obtain the survey, by way of the agreement that they sign with a home builder. If that is some time ago and it's a resale home, they might be able to potentially get one from the city, whether it's from the planning department or the building department. They might also be able to get one from the registry office. So if those avenues aren't available to them, then it may be that a survey is required. In speaking with staff, engineering staff on the matter, I'm understanding that there may be some flexibility with respect to the fee for the application. if staff are understanding that there's been some hardship in obtaining a survey as well. So those are considerations that are with staff, but I'm understanding generally that there's some difficulty if staff aren't provided with a survey to be able to accurately identify the dimensions and such.
So if we don't have a survey at the registration, because I've gone there to get survey from you, sometimes they're not registered. What, and the guy did not get one from a lawyer or never been there 30 years and never had one. What does this resident do? He's not allowed to touch his driveway. We've never talked about a survey in our report. These are things that staff had, and now we're getting all the backlash. Like, I've never heard anything survey until all this, we're getting all these calls. It was a simple form to fill in, just like you do a curb cut. You put your name, your address, they say this is what you're allowed to do. We made this thing blow up as if you're building a house on these permits.
If I may,
So
through
I
you.
want to remove it. I want to go back. I want to go back, and I want to come back and see what Mississauga does. You pay a fee to go on the drains, because we've always talked about too much water going into our roads. That's what we talked about. That's what I kept hearing in the past. So if they're allowed to send the water in the road, and they pay them $280 per resident, what makes us any different from us? So region appeal. And staff at the region are okay with that. I met with Anthony, and he explained how the other cities do it. But we did not bring that report here.
Staff would like to comment. Councilor Fortini, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. In respect to the requirement for a survey, not only do engineering staff require it for an accurate evaluation, but it would be an integral part of determining whether it complies with the zoning bylaw. Obviously, the city of Brampton has a driveway maximum width permission that is based on the width of the lot. The width of the lot is accurately depicted on a survey. In addition, we also look to the dimensions of the parking space that will be created, and if the porch is interfering or if any portion of the home projects, into that parking space, then that is an evaluation that would have to be undertaken when a permit is applied for. Now, the curb cut application as it's currently being administered requires a survey. So every time the curb is cut, a survey is required to be submitted as part of that application package. It's evaluated. There's nothing new with this one, except that we are now expanding it onto the private property. So anytime a driveway is widened or resurfaced, a survey and an application would be required. Zoning compliance would be determined, as well as compliance with the other requirements of the driveway permit bylaw as recently enacted by council.
Yeah, and Mississauga has the same thing on the widening of the driveway. They have rules what you could do. If I do a deck under 2 feet and I come over, I don't need a permit. I don't need a survey. That's on the ground, and I don't understand why we need a survey. It cause more problem. So I think we should go back, because we're getting a lot of calls. It would have been better to leave it the way it is. I don't want to see driveways cut. We talked about water going into our drains. So if the region's okay to pay a fee, like Mississauga is, why are we cutting people's driveways? So long as they leave 40% green space on a 50-foot lot. They're okay with it. We should be okay with it, because we're saying the water's going in our drains.
And in respect to the requirement, through you, Mr. Chair, for the amount of permeable surface or impermeable surface, that would require an actual amendment to the zoning bylaw, which staff have suggested will be evaluated through the review of the comprehensive bylaw that's currently ongoing. So if council was to direct a change in how we apply the maximum driveway width provisions, or to determine it other than based on the width of the lot, which is currently how it's dictated, that would require a report back from planning staff through an amendment to the bylaw.
And so that's what I'm asking. I just want to go back and we might as well stay the way we were then, because
it seems like
the whole idea is we're always complaining about water in our drains, and people park. If they park there, well, they're not allowed to give them a ticket. But if they're causing a problem and the region's okay with it, other cities are doing it. They're willing to pay that fine by length, by foot, so long as they got 40%. I don't see what the problem is. Let them pay. And it goes to the region and helps for the water on the drains.
So, Councilor Fortini, just in consultation with the city clerk, essentially what you're asking is to reopen.
Yeah.
So,
through you, Mr. Chair, that can only be done at City Council, and that would be a reopening to, Council's passed 3 bylaws in regard to this at May 22nd Council meeting, Bylaw 105, 106, and 107, to implement this new program. So if Council wants to revisit that, it can only be done through a notice of motion to reconsider Council's decision at City Council.
So I'll reopen it there, I know, before, because it's coming out July 2nd, and I don't want this to start all over again, and I'm sending staff to do all the extra work, and, you know, I worked on it a long time, come back, so I'll open it this Wednesday then.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fortini. Councillor Palashi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think maybe something's a little bit confusing here. When a homeowner wants to resurface their driveway, do they need a permit?
Through Mr. Chairman, yes, the one does require a permit for that.
When a homeowner wants to resurface their driveway, do they need a stakeout?
So through Mr. Chairman, I can't confirm the details for you, but I believe that, yes, a survey would be asked for at that point in time as well.
Okay.
So and perhaps I can just differentiate between really a resurfacing with granular and such versus just rolling on some tar into a driveway. That would not require any permit process.
If somebody wants to resurface their driveway, and to me resurfacing is, you know, my driveway's bad, I want, you know, they're coming up the street and it's a great deal because they have extra asphalt, we get it all the time, they're doing a number of houses, they're gonna pull out my driveway and they're gonna resurface, they're gonna redo my driveway. They're gonna make it any bigger than what it currently is. Do I need a survey for that?
And through Mr. Chairman, I believe so. I think if the widths of the driveways aren't changing, there might be some flexibility that staff in administering the process might be able to have, but I think to date it's identified as, yes, a survey would be required.
Okay, so that's the issue that I'm getting. When people want to just resurface their driveway, they don't want to have to go through this lengthy permit process. And do they need a permit, a simple permit? 100%. I think that they do, and that was council's intent to keep all contractors honest, and the work was being done with quality for our residents. When it came to widening the driveways, and I completely understand and agree with what staff needs to do to ensure, because we're not going to undertake that. They're the ones that want to widen the driveway. We need to make sure that the checks and balances are in there in terms of where the lot lines are and what percentages, and unless it's permeable, I believe. But even still, we need to ensure you can't just have an interlock with the holes throughout your whole front yard. So I think that process is on the right track. But when it comes to just somebody that wants to put a new driveway in because theirs is cracked and chipping, I don't think they have to go through that length of a process.
So through Mr. Chairman, just in response to that, Councillor Palashi, I see the need really for staff to be flexible and give in ways if there is only modest amounts of work being done. So really what I would offer there is that staff can take that into advisement. We can speak with the other staff, engineering staff in particular, that are administering the process, and understand from them if there is some modification that they can make to really what they're intending to roll out for process in order to make it more easy to really attain, less encumbrances as far as information being required to be provided by the applicants with an application of that type.
And I think that's what's kind of causing a little bit of confusion, because they got bundled into each other, and Councillor Willens and I, and I'm sure other members of council, are getting hammered on the fact that it's a cash grab. It's it's this and it's that, and as an outsider looking in, yeah, you kind of see what they're referring to and what they're talking about when it comes to something as simple as redoing your driveway because you want your property to look good. Widening, on the other hand, we know that's an issue. We're trying to mitigate that as best we can, and I think staff's done a good job in doing that. And I think that so going forward, I don't know if that necessarily needs a reopening, but we definitely need to understand or provide staff with the opportunity to make it easier for residents that do want the resurfacing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Palashi. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just a question of clarification. the new bylaw passed by council only comes into effect in July, is that correct?
Through the chair, yes. The bylaw has a begin date of July 2nd when it comes in force.
And through you, Chair, so if we reopen this matter, do we have the ability to delay the bylaw from taking effect in July? At the same time?
Our city clerk can speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if the matter is, council's decisions are reopened, it basically resets the decision and council can take a different decision or a variation of the decision as it sees fit.
And
unless there is sort of irreconcilable actions that have occurred, and I'm not sure if there are in this case because the program will take effect as of the 1st of July.
Through the chair, so my understanding is the bylaw's been passed, but the bylaw includes an effective date that is deferred. So in order to delay the effectiveness of the bylaw, you'd actually have to amend the bylaw to change the effective date.
so through you, Chair, I understand also when council and staff undertook this review, which led to this new bylaw, we had also put a stay on enforcement of existing driveway widenings. Is that stay on enforcement still in effect until July?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, enforcement has been reinitiated on all of the driveways that had been complained about since the fall have now been or are being about to be investigated, and the bylaw will be enforced accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Because I think this is important if council decides at the next opportunity to reopen this matter. Those are some important points for us to be considering, and that's the end of my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I think staff, seems to be a tacit interest by council to amend or do what sees fit. And I think Councilor Fortino will have an opportunity to work with staff to come form, or any other councillor to look at a motion to do that. Okay, so there's no further, so I guess Councilor Fortini, are you okay then? Okay, we move on then to item 9.3, Councilor Bowman. Oh, sorry.
Thanks very much through you, Mr. Chair. There was an issue that cropped up just the end of last week with Palladium, which took over the Cineplex at Steeles and Kennedy Road. In particular, it had to do with a wall mural that we had earlier passed. We had passed a motion in council allowing them to do a wall mural of a certain size. However, it was brought to the attention of, I guess, our inspectors that what they were planning and what seemed to be going up are two different things. So, Rick, can you speak to that for me?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That's correct, Councillor Bowman. So, as you're aware, we did bring a report forward to council to recommend approval of a wall mural, and the sign bylaw currently gives council the authority to approve content of all wall murals. And this particular one, what you see that you see before you now, is the content that was approved in the staff recommendation report. So through the process of conducting our inspections, obviously we had noticed that there were some deviations from the approved content, and so we've subsequently are bringing before you and not a staff report in consideration of the time that we had, but just some infographics about what is currently being put on the wall. So what we can do today, in the interest of time, is provide the content to council to consider recommending approval of or not, depending on how you feel about the content. And we're happy to answer any questions. The sign bylaw as it's written right now doesn't really speak to how to regulate content of wall murals. But Elizabeth, maybe you can elaborate on this situation.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. The sign bylaw does specifically grant council the authority to approve any mural that is painted directly onto the wall. Signage obviously is regulated, and there are certain standards for signage, including the lettering. The signage that was, or the mural rather, that was originally put before you for consideration included some wording, the Live Wild logo or phrase, if you will, with lettering that did comply with the maximum height of 6 feet, for lettering. The Live Wild logo that you now see before you is, although we don't have a measurement, I'm going to say that it's probably anywhere from 10 to 15 feet high lettering. That's the estimation that we're getting. But this is simply a different graphic that is before you for consideration. It is simply a motion to either approve or not approve of what's being proposed at this point in time. There's no amendment to the bylaw that's required. So this is before you today for consideration.
Okay, Councillor William.
Thank you very much. The reason I brought this tonight is because this would have had to wait until the July 10th planning meeting, meaning they would have to delay the further finishing of this and the opening of it, the opening of the Palladium. So that's why I brought it to council. It's art. Believe me, I'm no judge of art, so I'm not one that's going to say, we don't like it, so you can't do it. It's just simply different than what they had originally planned. And I'm looking for discussion or the approval of other councillors as to if we go ahead with it and allow them to move on so that they can get this finished and opened up on time. Because July 10th, basically another 3 weeks away, is quite a wait for them to be doing nothing at the site.
Okay, Councillor Palashi.
Councillor Bowman, I'll try and help you a little bit because I do know art.
Good.
And that's not art. It's busy. I don't really, if they want to make it bigger, I think I'm okay with that. I don't really care about the size. It's just, it's very, it's not finished, right? There's.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is the finished image that you're seeing on the screen right now. It is a work in progress on the building. I do have some images of what's currently there. Not sure how well you can see that, but that's what it currently looks like as displayed on the building. But the image that you saw previously is what it will look like once complete.
That other image is going to look.
This is the complete image.
That's going on over top of what you just showed us?
Presumably, yes.
But I like that. I like this one better. Kind of. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe I don't know art. I just think it's too busy.
Okay, Councillor Fortini.
Thank you, through the chair. So what does staff like?
Staff has no opinion.
Staff were certainly in support of the previous mural. This one is problematic, and in particular, for me, and in enforcing the sign bylaw, the wording that's on this graphic that you see is, I'm going to say, double the size of what anyone else in the city would be permitted for wording that's associated with advertising, essentially, for a business. So if this is coming forward, I mean, the image, and I'll be quite honest, I don't know art either.
I thought you did.
I don't think that this is not appealing to me, certainly. We do have urban design staff as well that have been circulated and perhaps may want to comment on the nature and whether it fits in with the theme of the business. And I understand that it's, the Live Wild branding is something that Palladium is associated with. So perhaps the graphic is just an illustration of that.
So the picture there with the tigers, that was the original they wanted?
That was the original that they had
That was
presented
nice.
to staff.
I really like that.
Yeah,
At
it's
least
beautiful.
we know what it is. I agree with my,
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Fortini, I suggest when you open a Palladium that you can use the figure of the lion. Councilor Williams.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Do we know why they've changed it?
We do not know precisely why, other than that this is their preferred graphic, and it's obviously something that they've moved forward with without any kind of approval at this point. I believe that it was part of their initial submission when we were considering the approval prior to presenting it to council. This was one of their image options, but remembering quite distinctly that we asked them to finalize the image because it is going to be approved by council, and at that point they did select the tiger and the branding at that point, and specifically part of our recommended approval was the limitation on the size of the words that were associated with that. Then immediately following almost the approval by council, they went back to their original suggestion, which wasn't supported by staff.
Okay. So for me, I would like to know why they've changed it to this. I'm curious to understand what their vision was. I could see how maybe the tiger could be problematic. Some people might find that image a little bit scary, bringing their kids to the eyes. It could throw some people off. But it's hard to say because this could be considered urban art, and the artist who created this piece, you know, could be very attached to it. Is there any way to discuss with them about the size of the Live Wild, if that's really what we're having an issue with the size of it, or?
You know, overall, I don't know that it's necessarily a make or break. I just caution council that if the wording is approved at the size, that you likely will see more people coming before you for similar amendments.
Okay, I see. So you said you had urban design artists on your team, yes?
Certainly, I believe.
Yeah.
Yvonne is here down at the end.
Just curious to know your thoughts.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm Yvonne Yang, the manager of urban design. So from urban design perspective, this is considered an urban art, not public art. If it is public art, it does need to go through a public art process that culture department will be involved to evaluate the overall aesthetic and quality of the piece. For this location is fronting onto Queen Street, so it's within a commercial area with the kind of uses that anticipate would draw teenagers and a younger population. From that general perspective, from urban design perspective, this is supported.
Okay.
Good. Great. Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I personally think the tiger looks adorable. But my concern with this one is the font size and the possible precedent that would set for other property owners to go bananas in terms of the large font size on the sides of their buildings. I think that, you know, to your point, this would speak more so to the youth and their target audience for Palladium versus the Tiger, which is more for my son's age group, which is 9. So I totally get it. I'm wondering if they would be open to doing something a little bit more creative and limit the size of the text of the word, just so that we're not dealing with future situations where the font sizes are massive on sides of buildings.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think this is a valid comment. What we don't want to happen is businesses around the area start to copy, and it create an overall negative impact to the overall character of the neighborhood. What I would recommend to do is we'll be happy to have a sit-down conversation, and also potentially, if they are open to it, maybe some kind of communication piece and signage piece that they can talk about. What's the intent of this piece, and see what they can do in terms of communicating the messaging behind it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, through you, Mr. Chair. When we spoke to them, this was exactly what you said it was. It's urban art, it's graffiti. They're trying to make it more appealing to a certain age group. I too agree that if the sign, the letters were a little smaller that we had originally agreed to. I don't know if that's gonna make an awful lot of difference, you know, to the artist on the mural here. But I would be in favor of just saying to them, look, it's all about the sign, the size of the letters, that we have a precedent here that we can't go over. And if they can make those letters, the Live Wild, the same, what is it, 6 feet, 7 feet, I don't have an issue with that. Have we had any complaints from the neighboring tenants, Costco, the restaurants, Wendy's?
No, not to my knowledge. It was simply discovered through the usual inspections. They are in for sign permits, and permits have been issued, so our inspectors just noticed it when they were out there.
Okay, well, I don't know whether that needs a motion directing you to go back and talk to them and make the letters smaller. Rick, what do you think?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would really depend on timing. If this is something that you'd like to move forward immediately to allow them to finish the mural, then by the end of the committee meeting tonight, it would be wise for us to have some sort of a decision in place. If time is less of a concern, then we could certainly go back and sit with them to discuss what they would be willing to do to compromise in terms of the size of the lettering.
Okay, I know that time is an issue because I think not only the artist is being paid while we make a decision on stopping this and holding it, but I think other work is also being held off, painting of the other parts that are not connected to the mural. I will put a motion forward then that we direct staff to go back if it's possible, between now and committee on Wednesday, and direct them that the Live Wild letters must be a certain size to conform with everything else. And if that's agreeable, then that can come back to us in council on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowman. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to support whatever direction council and the local area councillors decide to take on this. And I want to just congratulate Cineplex for having created something that has led us to discuss their mural for the past 25-30 minutes, which I think is awesome, because that is exactly what any marketer dreams of doing. And if this makes it onto the front page of the National Post, so be it. I think that would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vicente, for letting us know that you would just follow what we're going to be voting on. I could see that we need a workshop on time management with council. So we have a motion moved by Councillor Bowman. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Now we go on to deferred matters. Do any members have questions or comments on the staff report regarding city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment to permit temporary parking of seasonal recreational equipment? Councillor Bowman.
Sorry, I'm a bit verbose tonight through you, Mr. Chair. I read the report. I've just got a concern about the 2-day-a-month limit. If you know, I know a lot of people who have recreational vehicles, boats. We're encouraging people to get out, to be active, not to stay around their house. And I'm not sure that, you know, if 2 days, if someone were to go and pick up their motor home from wherever they store it, for example, it may sit in their driveway for that week while they prepare it, while they get ready to go on vacation. And I don't want to, you know, penalize somebody who's got their boat there. Either they're winterizing it or getting it ready for spring, or their motorhome or their tents, because they're getting ready to go on a vacation and it happens to take them 5 days in that week before they actually take it on vacation. So I'm just a little concerned about that 2-day-a-month limit.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, just in response, the staff report that we put forward really identifies that it's a 3-day period.
3-day period, okay.
72 hours, and it's actually 2 3-day periods over the course of any given month. So really, the thought there was that it would be sufficient in allowing those residents that have recreational vehicles to be able to jockey back and forth between their home and cottage, marina, what have you. through our benchmarking that we've done with other municipalities, we saw that the other municipalities had some regulations that similar to that, and ours really goes over and beyond and it's more permissive than some of those provisions from other municipalities. Through the discussions that we've had with residents, and hearing from them on our proposed bylaw amendments as we had the public meeting and such, we understood that it was accommodating sufficiently. It satisfied their needs in that respect as well. But that's the background that staff had considered in putting this forward.
Okay, because I know in the conversations that I've had with a lot of people who have complained about other people's trailers, it's more the fact that the trailer is sitting there full of crap in their driveway and not, they haven't got it to the junkyard or to the dump or whatever, rather than a nice boat sitting there, for instance, or a camper trailer all compacted and looking nice. I just want to ensure that we've got a little bit of flexibility with people. And again, if somebody's got to go and pick up the camper trailer or whatever, leave it on their driveway for a week and get it ready so that they go on their 2 weeks vacation, that we're not jumping over there to find them for that. I just don't think that's right.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can confirm that, the zoning bylaw does restrict parking of trailers and boats in the front yard. However, if there is a complaint, it usually doesn't occur after 1 or 2 days that a boat has been sitting there. It's usually after a prolonged period where it's starting to become a nuisance or it's, an obstruction of some sort. And even then, so a complaint comes in, it will be, 3 or 4 days before an inspector goes out to inspect. It will be another week or possibly 2 before it gets reviewed and a notice goes out. And then there's a 3-week compliance deadline for someone to actually move it. And potentially that can be extended upon request if somebody feels, that they're looking for a storage unit or they're looking to find accommodation for it. So while the bylaw is fairly restrictive, this does provide some entrenched flexibility for those 2 periods of 3 days, 3-day periods twice a month. But it also, is really just how the bylaw is being enforced at this point in time. If the trailer is gone before bylaw enforcement gets out there in a week, then it's really not an issue because there's no violation observed at that time.
Okay, I believe we have a delegate want to speak, but I don't know how we.
Yes, I believe to add a delegation, we need a motion to add the delegation, moved by Councillor Bowman. All in favor? Carried. So if you can just come to the podium, sir, and state your name and address, please.
Yes,
for our
my
record.
name is Richard Wright, 95 Cherry Tree Drive in Brampton. Number one, I was at last year's meeting, spoke at that meeting, did my 3-second rant. I'm very glad to hear Councillor over here sort of on the same page as me. I must admit, I am somewhat happy about the fact that they've decided to move it from one 72-hour period to 2 72-hour periods, but it really does not do me any good with my boat in the middle of December, January, February, March, when it's in storage. A number of the, if you go to 11, sorry, I have to look at it now, I think it's 11. Some of the other areas around. Sorry, I had it here. You take a look at Burlington. If you take a look at Milton, if you take a look at Oakville, East Gwillimbury, they allow for parking of a motorboat on your driveway from May to October. That's really what I would like to see. Like I say, I know it's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen for people that have snowmobiles, because I don't think they want to be parking their snowmobiles. They want to be putting them in storage from May to October and bringing them out in October and November. So maybe what council needs to do, or the planning committee needs to do, is readdress the issue and allow for seasonal parking of personal watercraft. Personal recreational vehicles. because I used to have a snowmobile years ago. I don't anymore. I'm getting too old and cranky to drive one of those suckers anymore. But I know there's a lot of people that have them. There's a lot of people that have utility trailers. There's a lot of people that have, and it still bothers me to this day that the bylaw allows for parking of a pop-up tent trailer on your driveway 12 months a year, 24 hours a day. That's a recreational vehicle. I'm sorry, my boat is a recreational vehicle, and the people that have motorcycles and snowmobiles and Sea-Doos and whatever else you would like to think, those are recreational vehicles. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just said my piece. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was listening to me.
Thank you. I wouldn't go, I'm not sure if Councilor Fortini, do you have a question for the delegation? Okay, so you're good. You can sit down.
Thank you.
Councilor Fortini.
I'm glad the gentleman brought it up. So we got the pop-up utility trailers. They're allowed all year. And if you look at the length, I think we passed something, you're allowed 27 feet last year. You're allowed a certain, from the tongue to the end, correct, Mr. Bowman? We had a certain distance. You were allowed to park it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The bylaw currently does exempt camper trailers that are in the closed position that do not measure more than 5 meters in length, and that includes the tongue. So that's a current exemption. It's been entrenched in the bylaw since, I'm going to say, the late 70s, early 80s. It was likely as a result of an amendment that was passed by council at that time, specific to those types of recreational vehicles. This report is recommending that larger recreational vehicles be exempt, so up to 7 meters in length, excluding the tongue, for temporary periods, just to allow for them to come home, be serviced, and be removed. But it's the resident is quite right. There is an exemption. It simply applies year-round for a camper trailer in the closed position, measuring 5 meters in length.
So 7 meters. Last year, I think, when we talked about those 7 meters with those big trailers you pull, like a camper, so they could clean it, vacuum it, charge a battery, and take it. But when we go to the boats, mosquitoes, they go usually 15th of April to the 15th of November. They use boats, and then in the winter, they store the boats and they use the skidoos. Those length are the same as a pop-up trailer, less than 5 meters. I'm not talking about the big Winnebago that, you could fit a whole family in. I get that. But what about the boats now? They're the same length. They're under 5 meters from the tongue down.
So through Mr. Chairman, if I can just add to the conversation here. So further to what Elizabeth Corzola has added, yes, the bylaw as we're proposing tonight is a 7 meter length. Over and beyond it, it also allows some tongue for the trailer as well, so it's greater than the 7 meters even that we are proposing to be approved. And then the height is a height of 3 meters, so to allow quite a substantial boat to be allowed, to that degree, that length at those periods on residential properties. We felt that really the size that really is being allotted for by way of that bylaw it strikes a balance between really providing convenience for the residents and being able to jockey their vehicles, their boats in particular, back and forth and such as they need to seasonally. If there is a intent for us to look at being more permissive on smaller matters like personal recreational craft for boats and such that are comparable to that of pop-up trailers, that's something that staff can look at.
And that's what so you get a skidoo trailer, you put the skidoo on, it's less than 5 meters, only 3-point-something meters, and it's not as high, it's not over 3 meters, it's 10 feet tall, it's under, it's only 1.5 meters, 2 meters with the skidoos. So we can look at that. Good.
Okay, Councillor Bowman.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on what Councillor Fortini is talking about, and what the delegate has talked about as well. I don't own skidoos, but it's probably a little easier in summer or in spring to move a boat around, to go and pick up a boat, for example, and take it. But, you know, if you're an avid skidooer, for example, you're gonna want to have your trailer with your skidoos fully accessible to you, so that if we get a nice snowfall, you can hook up the trailer and go. And you know what, if you've got a driveway that is suitable for 6 cars, I honestly don't see the difference between parking 2 cars and a trailer with 2 skidoos on it, or 1 skidoo, or a sea-doo, or whatever, and parking 6 cars there full-time. I don't understand. Are we getting that many complaints about boats and trailers in the driveways that this has become a big issue that we're debating at council? John, like, what are we talking about? 25 a year, or 500 a year? 1 billion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we probably average about 150 complaints per year, year-round, and that would include all types of trailers, box trailers, construction trailers, that sort of thing. Boats and trailers, not as much. Skidoos, not as much. They do exist, and it does, we do have to enforce. However, the numbers overall really average around 150 a year.
Okay, but that includes everything. That's
correct.
Yeah, but we're not talking about things equivalent to a camper trailer. 5 meters. How much is 5 meters in feet? 17 feet. You know, a trailer with a skidoo on it, or a sea-doo, or a small boat. I mean, it's still within that size of a camper trailer, and I honestly don't see why they can't be parked there on a seasonal basis. Bigger trailers, and sir, I don't know you, I don't know the size of boat you have, maybe it's a 300 horsepower, I don't know. But I understand if it's a bigger boat and it blocks vision, or it's 25 feet with a trailer hitch, I understand that. But, you know, if we're talking about the same size as a piece of equipment that's currently allowed to be there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, I don't understand why we just don't change the bylaw to say that we allow seasonal parking of recreational vehicles at that certain size. It makes it so much simpler, and I believe it would help the bylaw officers. You know, if it's a trailer full of crap, good. It doesn't belong in your driveway. Get rid of it. If it's like a big tank, if it's a big tank, then yeah, I can see why people might complain. But you know, if it's a nice compact little boat with a nice top on it, and that's my theory, anyways. And I can't support this. I would rather this go back to staff to come back with something to do with the seasonal parking of recreational vehicles at that certain size. I mean, we're talking about a community or an age now where we're encouraging people to get out of their houses, to be active, to go and do stuff. But yet we're telling people, if you're a skidooer and you're going to get out there every second weekend and have fun and tow your sled and be healthy, no, we're not going to let you do that in your driveway. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So if I would like to propose a motion that this goes back to staff to look at specifically recreational vehicles in the same vein that we have camper trailers, which are recreational vehicles.
Do staff have any comments or any concerns? No.
Through Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, I would just offer that the staff are generally amenable to really providing a revised bylaw for council's consideration that would look at then smaller vehicles, treating them a little bit differently, more flexibly, as far as allowing some longer periods of time for them to be stored in those ways, and for us to treat the much larger vehicles, boats, 3 meters tall, 7 meters in length, differently and in a comparable way to what we have before tonight.
Yep, that's all I'm asking.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Palashi, speaking to the referral.
I'm going to support Councillor Bowman's referral, and I just ask that you maybe keep in mind or provide an opportunity for, you know, we deal with a lot of lot sizes throughout the city, you know, from small to large lots, and we also have bylaws that reflect lot sizes in the city. You can have, I think you can have 2 chickens for an acre, something like that. But if it can work with the effect that you know, the bigger lots potentially have more opportunity to house something, so maybe it can be a little bit bigger if it's 5 feet now for everybody, and if the lot size is, you know, much bigger, maybe it can be an extra foot or 2 feet or something. Can you incorporate something like that in the report to come back for council's consideration?
Yeah, through Mr. Chairman, staff will take that under advisement as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we have a referral from Councillor Bowman. Is there a time period you want to put back in terms of when you want staff to come back?
Through Mr. Chairman, staff will really understand that we want to bring it back. I think council wants to really have it back in front of them shortly. We'll work through the clerk's office to understand how we can bring that forward to one of the next upcoming meetings, potentially for the July 10th dates that are available.
Okay. Great. So all in favor? I see hand carried. Thank you very much. We now go to Councillor question period. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Bowman, on a roll.
Sorry through you, Mr. Chair. Just a question to planning. We passed a bylaw, or we passed a motion a couple of weeks back about an environmental emergency here in the city and what we were going to do about it. I'm just wondering, when a new application comes forward, for example, for a high-rise, is there anything that allows us to tell the builders of the high-rise that there needs to be so many charging stations, or there needs to be so many plugs in an underground garage, or anything like that? Because, you know, there's no question, the trend is to move to electric vehicles. But if we're building high-rises, and in those high-rises there's nowhere for people to plug in their electric vehicles, it might be a little bit of a concern, and maybe they can even charge extra for a parking spot. But do we have anything that says we would like to see that incorporated into their buildings?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, so I'm not aware of any really requirements that we have with us at this point in time where we would put, you know, specifics on that through to the applicant. I think as we're all seeing, you know, the change of the world and, you know, technology coming on to a greater degree, and some trends with those different types of power plants and automobiles and such, yeah, there's a need for us to really work with applicants towards providing more units for plug-in for the vehicles and things of that type. At this point in time, they're just informal conversations that we have and suggestions that we would put through to applicants. And I think in working with property owners with for high-rises, I think they are quite savvy themselves already and are thinking about those things, but there is nothing formal as far as strict requirements that I'm aware of at this point in time. I'd be curious to understand from our chief building official about any tie-in that there would be with the OBC requirements.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to satisfy your curiosity, Alan. The Ontario Building Code actually did have some requirements set to come into place in 2020 for electric vehicle charging stations, and a minimum percentage of the required parking to be provided with that. However, the provincial government, as it stands today, quickly repealed that section of the building code. So those measures which were set to come into play in 2020, more in 2022, and ultimately moving towards a zero carbon footprint, by 2030 was the ultimate date. That has all been withdrawn from the building code. So at this point, I mean, we do have minimum standards for environmental sustainability in the building code, but they are significantly cut back from what they were 2 years ago.
Thanks, Chief. And just one more question. In Leeds, is there anything in Leeds that would talk to or speak to the number of electronic charging stations that might be needed in a building for standards, gold, silver?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Leeds is a fairly complex system. So there are various ways that you can achieve LEED standards. It's local sourcing, for instance, reuse of material, recycling of material, and electric vehicle charging stations would go towards points to get you a lead standard for sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bowman. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just wanted to add that this is also an opportunity for us through the sustainability measurement scoring on planning and various applications. I was actually going to ask, as a follow-up to Michael Hoy, to his report, whether or not things like EV charging stations are included in that sustainable measurability score. And certainly that could be an incentive for us, and maybe moving forward with that climate motion, we could look at ways how that climate motion has an impact on planning to create our own incentives for the city of Brampton. That's it. No questions, sorry, just following up to Bowman. That's okay, he spoke a lot.
Thank you, Councillor Santos. Now we go on to public question period. Yes, Sylvia.
Hello, this is Sylvia again. So the student housing thing, as far as I could tell, did not mention York or Humber whatsoever, even though Humber is actually fairly close to Brampton, and we run substantial bus service to both Humber and York. Has the city looked at having some kind of overall town and gown organization? Because we have Sheridan's Davis campus here, we have Algoma, we have people who live here to go to the HMC campus, we have people going to the Humber campus, we have people going to the York campus. So because there's 5 institutions, have we looked at something overall, or are we disregarding the thousands of people who go to institutions just outside of Brampton?
I'll probably answer that, Sylvia. Probably you heard council members speak to the various institutions, and as part of the referral back, we asked staff to consider all the different institutions and consider where they're coming from. And I will remind you, Councillor Williams, beg that question, where do they come from? Who are these students? So your answer is yes. So thank you very much. Okay, and can I get our next meeting is Wednesday, July 10th at 7 p.m. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Palashi. All in favor? Carried. Have a good evening.